turn in your third learning activity, please do so ASAP, as I am deducting points from the assignment. If you have turned your assignment in, your grade has been posted. So. So please make note of the starting time. We're starting a half hour early next Monday. And we have an hour and 50 minutes. So to utilize the time, I will ask about 4 people to volunteer to share some of their research on the organization that they have decided to research for the last learning activity. I've actually received some assignments for learning activity 4 already, which is a good thing for those of you that are planning ahead, as a common trend. Time seems to go twice as fast during this time frame. So, also regarding the upcoming exam, like I said, it'll be a lot like 1 and 2. I haven't decided. It's more than likely about 30 to 35 multiple choice questions. Not yet fully determined as to that numerical, to the number of questions. So I would just prepare for 30 to 35 multiple choice questions, and a short answer section like you've seen before in 1 and 2, exams 1 and 2. And if you haven't already, right, the study guide is in 3 parts, right? Chapter 9, and then a section addressing day before yesterday's lecture, specifically on there, right? So that's specifically from lecture. Okay. There are correlations both to the film on Flint and the presentation made yesterday, day before yesterday, and some of the items in the chapter. Okay. Mainly the application of environmental justice, environmental racism to the example that we saw yesterday's lecture. Okay. So just as we were kind of rushed at the end, right? I actually presented this lecture about a year ago at the University of Arizona at a water conference. And like I said, that's just one of the impacts, of this radioactive dormant contamination throughout the landscape of northern Arizona. Through the trace process, right, of wind-blown contamination. As we said, tracing the dendritic patterns of major tributaries, even minor tributaries, right? The example that we had over the weekend, right? With the flash flooding that occurs when these dry, dormant arroyos, rivers, right, that usually don't run, can be, fast charging waterways, as we know here in the Sonoran Desert. And again, geography being a significant part of the impacts. Similar to the example in Michigan with Flint, right? I mean, all that fresh water surrounding that particular city. Why this one town not having the systematic delivery system of other municipalities in the state. Right? And the response of state regulators to kind of look the other way, which is common in environmental work, right? Where we have a population that's impacted, right? And like one of the theoretical outcomes discussed in chapter 18 is emergent norm theory, right? Where new norms evolve as a result of a negative experience, right? So a lot of these people that live on these contaminated areas have become vigilant, have become suspicious of certain situations by their lived experience, right? They've become extremely aware of the neglect by social institutions like the government in their response to these issues of concern, right? And even most importantly, right, when it involves situations regarding human health, right? And a lot of times the jury's still out in the determining the true outcomes on the impacts to the population. And many times, like I said, in response to the number of deaths among workers, the Congress has passed a legislation called the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act that compensates victims like this in the amount of $150,000. How you determine a dollar value on a human life, is beyond me, but that's what Congress has come up with, right? So like I said, personally, like a lot of the people in Flint, right? I have two uncles who died of cancer as a result of being uranium workers, right? One received $150,000 compensation through the legislation, the federal legislation. The other didn't. And initially the legislation, when passed by Congress, the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, passed in 1990, only covered underground miners, right? And all the other population were atomic veterans who were at these atomic testing sites in the late 40s, 1950s, before testing of nuclear weaponry became banned in the world, right? Or at least above nuclear testing. And many times, nation states like ours, after we detonated the nuclear weaponry at Hiroshima and Nagasaki to end World War II, we continued our nuclear arsenal testing in Pacific atolls, like the Marshall Islands, Fiji, and other areas where where our country, right, had banned nuclear testing in our nation state, but the testing continued somewhere else, right? And I have a documentary called Nuclear Savage, where in the 1950s, the federal government of the United States almost thinks nothing of testing nuclear weapons in those isolated Pacific atolls and islands, right? To the extent that federal governmental officials, call the population savage. Just a bunch of savages living out in the Pacific, it really doesn't matter. So these emergent norm attitudes, emerge. And one of the divisive factors when we look at the environmental equation is, obviously what we see in the forefront today in many examples, regarding different industries, different types of energy development, natural resource development, right, is employment versus environmental protection, right? And that becomes the conflictual application of opposing viewpoints, right? And largely, presently, like reintroducing different types of coal mining in different geographical, or revisiting that process, is using this basic argument, right? And in underdeveloped nations and developing nations where employment is necessary, right? In most cases, in underdeveloped nations, employment and economic development is gonna overtake environmental protection, right? So this is just not, we looked at a local example, right? And if we move, and the injustice of a lack of response, right, to these contaminated areas, and again, a lack of response from the federal government addressing comprehensive health studies in impacted communities. That's still a tremendous work in progress. And this is just one geographical location, right? If we move to places like central and northern Louisiana, a place they call Cancer Alley, right? Similar situation, right? Populations petitioning the federal government for comprehensive health studies as a result of oil refineries, oil development in that area of the country, right? Or, places like Paducah, Kentucky, a very rural, isolated population where a lot of the plutonium that was taken from uranium mines was processed, and you have environmental contamination, plumes, and health concerns there as well. The Fernald Nuclear Processing Facility in Ohio, Savannah Fuels Nuclear Processing Plant in South Carolina. And the commonality that you see in those examples is populations of color, economically depressed, impoverished populations, right? So as Marx was saying, it's not only economic exploitation, right? These are human rights violations when you expose a population to those types of possible health outcomes. So you can see how this necessitates collective behavior. If we look at, this is a vast geographical area when you think about it, of water concerns in northern Arizona, right? Now here's I-40, right? Here's Flagstaff, and all this is an area of concern regarding chemical derivatives that have contributed to the contamination, mainly seepage into the underground aquifers and water tables. And we have two major ones in northern Arizona, the Coconino Aquifer, which is a vast underground plume currently of potable water, and the Navajo Aquifer, which is up here. So these continual neglect by the federal government, right, impacts the most basic necessity in natural resources that we as humans need, right? And again, the exposure sources, right? And like I was saying to end the class, a major concern is proposed, I really don't think it's gonna happen, but it's a possibility, right? Future uranium development on the north and south rim of the Grand Canyon, right? Which these facilities have been available for years, but because of the depressed economic market for uranium on the world market, I think only like at about $30 a pound right now. It's really not economically feasible, especially when you consider what you just heard, the environmental contamination or the economic or the employment outcomes. Right? So on the north rim of the Grand Canyon, as I said earlier, our previous presidential administration imposed a 20-year ban of any type of nuclear development in Grand Canyon National Park and the Coconino National Forest. Right? However, the present administration has overturned that process and are looking into development proposals, right? And like I said, why anyone would want to threaten one of the 7 natural wonders of the world that bring people to our state from all over the globe, threaten that, you know? And not only that, further threaten the drinking water as a Colorado River runs right below. Right? And you have populations like the Havasupai tribe that live at the bottom of the Grand Canyon that have been fighting this tooth and nail in Congress over the last week. And we only look at uranium mining as an extractive hard rock mineral. Right? This is an example of a gold mining spill near Durango, Colorado, where again, contaminants turned the Animas River mustard yellow, right? And the Animas is a tributary of the Colorado. The Animas flows into the San Juan. The San Juan flows into the Colorado River near Mexican Hat, Utah, just above Lake Powell, right? And as you can see, if you've ever been to Durango, Colorado, right, one of the most beautiful places in the world, right? And all this potential agriculture here that you see, these agricultural fields have been dormant ever since the spill in 2015. Right, so people, when they argue employment and economic advancement, well, these people, their livelihood being agriculture and livestock raising, right? The animals eat a lot of what's grown, right? In raising livestock has been impacted over the last 4 years. And if you've ever been to Durango again, right? This is a lot of this has seeped to the river bottom, right? But this is kind of the recreation has been impacted, right? Before and after the spill. And another issue that we should be concerned about in Arizona and throughout the Southwest. Any state or municipality that uses the Colorado River as domestic drinking water, or even economic development, agricultural uses, right, has to be concerned with the levels going down and down and down. It's estimated that the elevation of the water in Lake Mead, when it drops below 1,075 feet, it's been determined that, like in California in previous years, we may have to ration water. And it's getting very close to that altitude. Before last winter, right, we were probably 50 feet above that level. So, again, this has reached similar low levels historically in the past, right? But the use regarding the population is far greater now than it was historically in the past. Right? So again, Lake Mead is at some of its lowest levels in history, right? And if you've ever gone to Vegas lately and traveled over Lake Mead, this is what you see. And like I said, looking at different areas of the Colorado River, this is around Lake Powell, right? About a 14-year time frame difference, right? The same area of the river. Right? And like I said, fortunately, over last year and over this last weekend, we've achieved a tremendous amount of snowpack, which feeds our rivers, which naturally feeds our rivers, right? But again, if we have contaminants in these tributaries, right, on the way to our major water sources, there's a concern, right? And like chapter 18 addresses, right, a lot of these issues result in collective behavior or social movements. Right? This is the protest movement up in North Dakota opposing the Dakota Access Pipeline that went directly under the Missouri River that Native American people felt was an environmental threat to the river, right? And the pipeline was approved in 2017. And since that approval, there have been 8 recorded spills of the Dakota Access Pipeline threatening the Missouri River, right? So, you know, corporations, the industry will tell you, you know, well, these are guaranteed, right? No, these catastrophes are not gonna happen. But we've heard that outcome before, right? Another area in the west, in our backyard, that is being threatened are national monuments, okay? Such as Bears Ears in southern Utah, right? That borders all the Canyonlands, Zion, Bryce, right? So the red area was the national monument in its original existence. It has been downsized to the area in yellow, right? And all the outlying areas are now open for oil and gas, uranium development in this area, right? So a lot of the, and again, right next to the Colorado River. So again, we see a downsizing of a national monument for, right, economics and employment. Another national monument area, this time in New Mexico, is oil fracking at Chaco Canyon. An ancient civilization, right? At Acoma, we believe in our oral history that we have ancestors that once lived here, right? And, you know, threatening places like this, right, unifies those that emphasize environmental protection. So again, this is another mine, this time on the north rim, the canyon mine of the Grand Canyon, just over the hill beyond those trees, right? So the question becomes, right, do we want to threaten the existence of the pristine areas of the Grand Canyon with limited economic and employment rewards? Another major concern that we've had in the northern Arizona area is coal development, coal-fired development. We hear about fossil fuels and their impact on global warming, right? Creating this shield to accelerate the sunlight on our planet, right? That has resulted in, within the last 10 years. Right now, the United Nations is convening the, what is called COP22, right? The convention, the People's Convention on Climate Change in Madrid, Spain, right? And there's a delegation there, some representing Arizona, emphasizing, you know, the necessity, like the Navajo generating station, be closed down, right? And the arsenic and other heavy metals, right, settle again right on Lake Powell, right? Colorado River drinking water. This is scheduled to be completely phased out by the end of the year, December 31. 45 years it's provided electricity to our fair city, Los Angeles, Las Vegas, Salt Lake, Albuquerque, right? All these major cities. And what's ironic about this situation is about 20% of Navajo Nation members still don't have electricity and running water in their houses, but yet their land provides, you know, all this energy source that we all need in the Sonoran Desert. And again, raising the question of environmental concern, I want to emphasize that we as a population, as the human race, have no safe nuclear repository in the world, in the entire world. So where do we put this nuclear waste, right? In nuclear power plants like Palo Verde, it's sitting on site. Okay. Yucca Mountain was proposed, right? Geologists found flaws in that proposed storage facility. We have a low-level temporary storage facility in New Mexico, the Waste Isolation Pilot Project, that accepts only low-level waste. Okay. So, you know, I once traveled to Sweden, to Oskarshamn, Sweden, where the Swedes are looking at a nuclear repository site underground. The geology is granite, right, and igneous hard rock, right? And having visited the facility, man, we went like 1,000 meters in a bus, right, below, like this was the surface of the land, right? And they had like this roadway, right, like this, where we took a bus about 1,000 meters below the earth, right? And then we got in an elevator and we went down 2,000 more meters below the earth. You know, I couldn't believe standing in the core of the earth at that depth. And at below, as we reach this area, and again, we're surrounded by granite rock, right? Like a big solidified basement, if you will. And at the bottom were these casks. They look like this. And they were buried right into the bottom of the granite like this. And we're 2,000 meters below the earth. These storage canisters, as they were called, were 50 million metric tons. And then they were going to be covered by a lid, which was 25 metric tons at that depth, right? So it shows you the concern of the spread of radioactive contaminants, that you have to secure it to this capacity, right? In Oskarshamn, Sweden. And the Swedes say, well, this facility is just for us, right? We're only going to secure our nuclear waste in this facility, and we're not going to accept anybody else's. Right? So as a nation state, the United States has some of the most stockpiled contamination of nuclear waste, probably equal to the Soviet Union, right? As a result of all the nuclear weapons we developed in the Cold War with Russia. And ironically, just, you know, when we met on Monday was the 30-year anniversary of the United States and Russia signing the treaty that ended the Cold War, right? But what didn't go away are the thousands of nuclear weapons that threaten the existence of this planet, right? And a Soviet leader, as well as an American leader, at any time, at any second, right, can detonate a nuclear weapon. Most of them are stored in silos pointed at Russia in the northern Great Plains. And these are manned 24 hours a day, 365 days a year by federal, governmental, and military employees. So again, I just want to show you the capacity of the impact of just one extractive resource that we're concerned about, right? Not to mention like coal, oil, and gas, and other energy forms of development. And granted, we need electricity, right? But I think underutilized at this time in history are the renewable sources of energy. I remember way back in the 1970s, people were talking about solar, but because of the economic control of corporate America in mining and milling, in other extractive industries, right? The grip that they have on Congress, like big tobacco or other social organizations we've studied in here, right? Now they come to realization, right? 50 years later after the fact, when this could have already been part of the infrastructure, the transition, the just transition could have already taken place, right? Especially, why do we need nuclear development when we have the wind capacity in Arizona and the sun that shines probably 350 out of 365 days a year, right? It's unfathomable that we can create these areas of contamination at the expense of the environment and human health. And not to mention, you know, like in regards to the rights of nature or the rights of Mother Earth, you know, who speaks on behalf of the river, right, that's being contaminated, right? Or who speaks on behalf of the animals that are being contaminated by this facilitation of our necessities as human beings? And we talk about ecological change, not only in weather, but looking at species of animals that have been eliminated as a result of climate change. So let me just show you two quick real examples here as we look global.
With over 50,000 CarMax cars to choose from, it's easy to find the right style for you.
Speaking of style. Nearly 8 years ago, after a devastating tsunami hit Japan, the Fukushima power plant is still trying to clean up from one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. In March of 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck 80 miles off the coast of Japan, and that earthquake sent two 50-foot-high waves straight into Fukushima. The water hit the generators powering the power plant, causing the uranium inside to explode.
CNN executive